My career as an auto mechanic was cut short by a serious eye condition, making it harder and harder to do the job I loved. With a heavy heart, I had no choice but to leave the mechanic world behind and return to my family's farm, where generations before me had worked the land. My older brother, always the kind-hearted one, welcomed me back with open arms. Then one day, while driving down a country road, I came across a stranded luxury car and a young woman looking completely lost. To my surprise, she was the daughter of the CEO of the biggest car company in the country. And that's where my story takes an unexpected turn. I've always had a passion for working with cars. And just when I thought that chapter of my life was over, fate had other plans, bringing a major figure right into my path. My name is James Harris, and I'm 31 years old. Until last year, I was working as a mechanic at a major car dealership. My fascination with cars began when I was in grade school. A close friend's family owned a body shop, and every time I visited, I got to see a variety of cars: racers, classics, and rare foreign models. Since I loved playing with toy cars from a young age, I must have been passionate about cars even before I was born. Naturally, I became interested in real cars. I found it more fun to learn about cars from my friend's older brother, who was a certified mechanic. When I told him I wanted to work with cars in the future, he was delighted and let me ride in different cars. I learned the technical skills while having fun, and I smoothly found my path forward. I was optimistic, dreaming of living surrounded by the cars I loved when I grew up. However, I soon realized the harsh reality that owning the cars I loved would require a lot of money. My family has been farmers in the countryside for generations, so my parents assumed that both my brother and I would take up farming. In fact, my brother, who is 5 years older than me, planned to follow in our parents' footsteps and continue farming. My brother never minded working with soil or growing crops, and he had been interested in farming since he was a child. But I didn't want to work in agriculture. I always wanted to work with the cars I loved. Driven by that passion, I aimed to become an auto mechanic. I enrolled in a mechanic school, and my days of steadily learning and acquiring skills were very fulfilling. I think the most fun I had was during my school days. A particularly memorable moment was winning the Future Mechanic competition for students. This competition was hosted by the largest automobile manufacturer in the country, and students aspiring to be mechanics from all over the country participated, competing with their knowledge and skills. The winner will receive a trophy and a certificate from the company's president, Robert Woods, and the opportunity to train at the company's car production factory. I won that competition, but then tragedy struck. That year, a fire unfortunately broke out at the company's main factory, halting the production line. The fire caused significant damage, and my training was postponed, leaving me to graduate without completing it. However, there was no use regretting what had happened. I just needed to find a job and start gaining experience as a mechanic. But the job was much tougher than I had anticipated. The more prestigious the company, the heavier the responsibilities. A simple love for cars isn't enough to handle the job. If there's even the slightest mistake in maintenance, it could lead to accidents that risk lives and damage the company's brand. Despite that, the hours are long, and the pay isn't as high as one might expect. Sometimes, you have to perform precise work in harsh conditions. Freezing cold in the winter and unbearable heat in the summer. And just because you're a mechanic doesn't mean you're always working behind the scenes. There are times when you have to interact directly with customers. You have to patiently explain things to ensure they understand, and sometimes you find yourself caught between the customer and the sales team. While I had no problem getting covered in grease, dealing with human conflicts was something I struggled with. On my days off, I was so exhausted from work that I barely had time to enjoy my personal life. I even found myself with fewer opportunities to drive the cars I loved, and in search of better conditions, I switched companies a few times. But the industry is pretty much the same everywhere, and I wasn't the only mechanic to leave. Even so, I kept telling myself that I chose this path because it was what I loved, and I pushed through the tough work. I reminded myself that being able to work with cars every day was a blessing, and I kept at it. Eventually, I settled at my current company, where I became recognized as a skilled mechanic. Now, I'm the lead on the floor, responsible for training new hires. My pay improved a bit, and I started feeling more motivated, but then the illness was discovered. About a year ago, I started experiencing occasional blurriness in my vision. I thought it was just fatigue from straining my eyes at work, so I used eye masks on my days off to rest them. But the symptoms didn't improve at all, and my vision continued to deteriorate. Eventually, the doctor told me I had a condition, and worse, that my vision wasn't expected to recover. The best they could do was slow the progression with medication, and I felt utterly lost. But I knew keeping it a secret could cause issues for the company, so I decided to tell the CEO. He's always respected me, both as a person and for my skills. And even after finding out about my condition, he assured me I could keep working within my limits. I was incredibly grateful and thanked him repeatedly. But the next day, when I arrived at work, something felt off. It was as if everyone was looking at me strangely. There's a younger mechanic named Matthew. Somehow, the cars I was working on had been assigned to him, leaving me with nothing to do. "Hey, your eyesight's messed up because of your illness, right? Just take it easy today and clean the tools or something," Matthew said with a laugh. I could tell that his words didn't come from a place of kindness. From that day on, Matthew's pressure on me only intensified. My coworkers weren't bad people, but there was a general sense of frustration hanging over the place. There were always small conflicts between the sales staff and the mechanics, and I had seen plenty of instances where new mechanics were scolded in what seemed like unreasonable ways by the senior staff. I didn't like that kind of behavior, so I always tried to teach the newcomers with sincerity, but Matthew would mock me, saying I was coddling the newbies. Some new hires couldn't handle the atmosphere and ended up quitting. Matthew was at the center of this toxic environment. He was younger than me, but had been working there longer, and the CEO trusted him. Because of that, Matthew exerted a strange kind of pressure on the workplace. Matthew, who claimed he was once a notorious troublemaker in the area, still hung out with a rough crowd, and that made people afraid of him for other reasons as well. So, I tried to keep things civil with him at work, avoiding any unnecessary conflicts. But after my illness became known, Matthew started directing his malice toward me. I had heard rumors that he was jealous of how the CEO favored me, and now it was starting to show. The younger colleagues who used to look up to me began to distance themselves, and I found myself increasingly isolated at work. If you get taught by a guy with bad eyesight, you might end up with bad eyesight too. I overheard Matthew saying that to the coworkers, with a smirk on his face. Being in that kind of environment, my health started deteriorating beyond just my eye condition. It became common for me to have stomach aches and headaches before work, and I even started experiencing ringing in my ears. Sometimes I'd feel so nauseous that I had to take frequent breaks. Still, I pushed myself to show up to work every day, trying not to take any time off. But one day, the CEO called me in directly. Apparently, Matthew had reported that I wasn't able to do my job properly. I insisted that it wasn't that I couldn't do the work, but that I wasn't being allowed to. "Please bring Matthew in here, and let's talk this out. I want to work just as much as anyone else. My eye condition is under control with medication, so it's not affecting my work that much." However, the CEO avoided making eye contact with me, staring out the window as he spoke. "Of course, I want you to stay with us. But if your condition is affecting your work, I have to consider the risks before any accidents happen. But I'm telling you, it's not impacting my work." I started to say, but then stopped. A sudden fear washed over me, as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The CEO then leaned in, peering at my face as he spoke. You know what I'm talking about, right? There was a mistake with one of the cars you were working on. Matthew noticed it when he took over, and it's a good thing he did, because if it had gone out to the customer like that, it could have damaged the company's reputation. I hadn't heard anything from Matthew about a mistake in my work. It was clear the CEO believed every word Matthew said. Matthew was making up lies to get me out of here. Angry, I went over to Matthew and confronted him. Stop feeding the CEO lies. If there was a mistake, you should have told me directly. Matthew furrowed his brows, but kept that sly smile on his face as he replied, "What's the point in showing you mistakes when you can't even see them? The truth is, no one here trusts you anymore. I mean, who's going to trust a mechanic who says, 'My vision's bad, but I can still fix your car'?" Matthew's words left me speechless. I wanted to say something back, but I couldn't find the words. Because the person most uncertain about my abilities is none other than myself. Honestly, it's true that my vision is getting worse, and I don't know how much longer I'll be able to continue as a mechanic. I could no longer stand by my own words with confidence. And so, I finally decided to quit being a mechanic and return to my hometown. The first person I told was my brother. He was the only person I could think of who would listen to this kind of talk seriously. My brother has always had a strong personality, and even in our rough hometown, he was respected. But when it came to me, his younger brother, he was a completely different person, kind and gentle. When I was a kid, I was often sick and had a weak body, so my classmates would tease me, saying I was like a girl. But every time, my brother would encourage me all the time. He taught me that when someone says something hurtful, I should not accept it, but bounce it right back. If someone's words hurt you, it's because you let them in. And if you respond by insulting them back, you're just lowering yourself to their level. So instead, deny it. Say with certainty that they're absolutely wrong. From that point on, whenever the boys teased me, I would shout back with all my strength, "No, I'm not." No matter what they said, I would bounce their words back with a strong will. After that, they eventually gave up and stopped bothering me. But it wasn't just that. I felt like I became stronger too, and I could handle a bit of teasing. Over time, I physically got stronger as well, and they stopped saying I was like a girl. Thanks to my brother, I became a stronger person. That's how I was able to endure the tough work and relationships as a mechanic and keep going this far. But this time, I couldn't do it. I couldn't push back and say, "No, you're wrong." I wondered what my brother would say to me now that I've been defeated by life. Bracing myself for a scolding, I called him. I weakly told him everything that had happened. My brother listened quietly to the whole story, and at the end, he simply said, "You did well." His voice was so kind and warm when he said that. The moment I heard those words, tears began to pour down my face, and I started crying out loud like a child, despite my age. "Come on home. There's plenty of work on the farm waiting for you." It was thanks to my brother that I was able to completely quit the jobs I once thought was my calling and return to the countryside. I'm deeply grateful to him for taking me in. My brother, who had fully taken over the farming from our aging parents, started a new company called Jake Farms, named after himself, and promoted his own method of natural farming. It wasn't easy breaking away from the traditional farming associations and sticking to his own ideas to start a business. But by using the internet to promote his unique farming approach, my brother began attracting young farmers who shared his vision, and soon the entire area became known as a village that practiced natural farming. Many people even came from afar to learn about the farming techniques. From that day on, I started working under my brother's guidance. Most of my savings from my days as a mechanic had been spent on medical bills, so in my mid-30s, I was nearly broke. I was determined to fully commit myself to the farm work from morning till night. On Jake Farms, we grew various crops and also raised livestock like cows and chickens, and even had a facility for processing farm products. The farm was run by our family and a few staff members. I started by getting used to the soil, helping with the land clearing. Land clearing is the process of turning untouched land into farmland by plowing it. My brother's farming method didn't use machines for land clearing, but instead promoted carefully plowing with traditional tools like a hoe. At first, the physical labor was tough, but I gradually built up the necessary muscles, and it stopped being painful. In fact, maybe because I was spending so much time in nature, my chronic health issues started to improve rapidly, and I even felt like my eyesight was getting better. Although I had thought farming was completely different from being a mechanic, I realized that at the end of the day, it's still about people working together. From now on, I wanted to enjoy life on this farm with everyone. A few weeks had passed since I started my new life. One day, my brother asked me to go into town to run some errands. As I was leisurely driving the farm truck down a country road, I noticed a luxury car parked on the shoulder, with a woman peering under the hood. I pulled over nearby and called out, "Do you need any help?" A young woman, who looked like she was still in college, turned to me with a worried expression and said,
The car suddenly stopped running. It's a borrowed car, and I have no idea what to do.
It was a well-maintained luxury car, by the looks of it. She mentioned it was borrowed, but lending out such an expensive car to someone who's not used to driving one, whoever did that must be pretty generous. Thinking about that, I leaned in with her to take a look at the engine. There's nothing really wrong with it. It's just out of gas. It had simply stopped because it was out of fuel. The woman blushed deeply, clearly embarrassed.
Seriously? Oh no, that's so embarrassing.
No worries, I've got a gas can in my truck. I'll fill it up, and you'll be good to go, I said calmly, and she apologized softly. Sorry for the trouble. No worries, I'm just glad it's nothing major. And I have to say, this is a really nice car. I'm a bit jealous you get to drive something like this, I said as I ran my hand along the body of the car, and she responded shyly.
Yeah, I don't really know much about cars. This is my dad's car. He's a huge car enthusiast and always insists I drive something nice.
I found out soon after that she was Isabella Woods, the daughter of the CEO of Robert Motors. Isabella introduced herself and explained that she was on her way to my brother's farm. She told me she was inspired by my brother's natural farming methods and wanted to experience it firsthand. It was surprising to hear that the daughter of a major company was interested in farming. If it were me, I'd probably just spend all my time driving every car I could get my hands on, taking advantage of being the CEO's son. Isabella ended up working alongside me to clear the land. I was worried about whether someone like her could handle the work, but to my surprise, she was much better at it than I was. She picked up the technique quickly and was plowing faster than I could. She must really love farming. The saying, "What you love, you excel at," seems to fit her perfectly. As we talked, she shared that she had spent her childhood in the countryside with her grandparents, surrounded by nature. She had a naturally sensitive skin condition, atopic dermatitis. It didn't like being seen because of her appearance. Her parents, feeling sorry for her, took her to every doctor they could find, but nothing seemed to help. That's when they met a doctor who practiced natural remedies and suggested she spend time in nature away from the city. Desperate, they sent her to the countryside, and it worked. As she grew older, her symptoms improved, and by the time she became adult, the condition had completely cleared up. Nature had changed her life. However, Isabella became troubled by how modern society, even in farming, was straying away from nature. While studying clean energy at college to protect the environment, she felt drawn to more personal, nature-oriented activities. That's when she discovered my brother's farm. She was moved by my brother's mission to create a village where people work together to support each other while staying close to nature. So she came to learn farming. It felt surreal that the daughter of a globally renowned company like Robert Motors wanted to learn natural farming and dedicate herself to it. It also made me realize how truly admirable my brother's work is. Talking with Isabella made me feel a bit small. Sure, I was enjoying the farming I had just started, but what I really wanted to do was work with cars. When I saw Isabella's luxury car earlier, I felt my old love for cars stirring back to life. I wondered if I could really stick with farming when those feelings were still there. The day had fully turned to night as we worked tirelessly in the fields. With mixed emotions swirling inside me, Isabella and I headed back to the farm office. And there, an unexpected person was waiting.
Dad, what are you doing here?
Before I could even react, Isabella shouted in surprise. It was because the person sitting there was none other than Mr. Woods, the CEO. Seeing Isabella's face, Mr. Woods let out a deep sigh and spoke. Isabella, you really had me worried. I was so concerned. I just couldn't sit still. Had to come check on you myself. Isabella exclaimed, "Oh," and quickly pulled out her phone. But it was dead, the screen completely black. Apparently, after her car ran out of gas and stalled, she sent a message to her dad asking for help and then forgot about it. Getting a panicked message from his daughter, who wasn't used to driving that car, would have freaked him out. And when he couldn't reach her after that, he must have been really worried. That's why he ended up coming here himself. I'm sorry, Isabella apologized. Mr. Woods sighed and ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Then he looked over at me, standing beside her. This was the second time I had met Mr. Woods. The first time was when I won the competition when I was in school. After he handed me the trophy, we had a brief conversation, but it was just a short moment. He's the CEO of a company with thousands of employees. There's no way he'd remember a young guy he talked to once. I hesitated, wondering if I should bring it up and introduce myself. But that hesitation disappeared instantly with Mr. Wood's next words. You're the one from back then. The fact that he remembered me gave me chills. I felt like I shouldn't let him say any more, so I responded eagerly. We met at the Future Mechanic competition. It was such an honor to spend that time with you. I was so nervous that I didn't even know what I was saying. I was on the verge of panicking. But then Mr. Wood smiled at me, like you would when seeing a relative's kid after a long time. I remember you. I had a great time back then, too. It's always a joy to see young people who love cars, and if I recall correctly, you mentioned talking to cars while working on them. I thought that was quite an interesting thing to say. Did I really say that? Honestly, I was so nervous back then that I don't even remember. I felt bad about what happened. Because of an issue at our factory, we couldn't follow through on our promise to you. By the way, are you still working as a mechanic? His question made me fall silent. I glanced behind him and saw my brother watching us with a concerned look. Actually, I just quit recently. I developed an eye condition and couldn't continue. The CEO looked at me in surprise and asked again. But you seem fine now. You walked back in the dark, so if you can manage that, I don't see why you couldn't keep working as a mechanic. I know, but it's not that simple. Others didn't see it that way. It might vary by company, but working as a mechanic at a dealership wasn't the best environment. It was frustrating. Sometimes, it felt like people were more focused on bringing each other down than on doing the jobs right. I knew it wasn't exactly something to tell the CEO of a big company, but I decided to be honest. It took some courage, but I felt like my brother was there encouraging me, and I managed to get the words out. I see, that's what happened. I've always tried to make sure our mechanics are treated well, because it's thanks to them that our company maintains safety and trust. As he spoke, the CEO took my dirt-covered hand. If you're interested, how about training at our company's main factory? You're still young and have so much passion. It would be a shame to waste it. It was an offer I couldn't refuse. But I had already told my brother that I would stay here and work on the farm. I glanced over at my brother. He was standing there, giving me a reassuring smile and a thumbs up. Seeing his encouragement, I knew what I had to do. I made up my mind to give my career as a mechanic another shot. Not long after that, my former car dealership made headlines for filing fraudulent insurance claims. Apparently, the fraud had been going on right under the CEO's nose, but I had no idea. They probably kept it hidden from me, fearing I'd expose it out of guilt. Matthew must have known, and maybe that's why he saw me as a threat. In any case, It's going to take a while for that company to regain its trust. Meanwhile, my skills were recognized during the training, and I was officially hired as a mechanic at Robert Motors. The job conditions were much better than before. I got proper rest, my health improved, and I found joy in my work again. I could even visit my brother's farm on my days off, reconnecting with nature and the life we'd built together. Isabella was thriving on the farm too. Just the other day, she shared with me the emotional experience of witnessing a calf being born. Her story moved me to tears, and we both ended up crying together. My brother walked in, saw us, and with a playful grin, teased, "You two are close, aren't you?" My brother's also getting married and becoming a father, and the happiness in his eyes is undeniable. As for me, I've come to realize that doing what you love is a true blessing. The world I see through my eyes, once dimmed by doubt, now shines brighter than ever, filled with promise and hope.